So in this part of the series, we will be developing a server endpoint component for TCS accounting, and we will be using a very well-known, predominantly used .NET technology called ASP.NET Core. I have done a fundamentals on ASP.NET Core version 6, so you can go and check out that resource if you've not listened to it before listening or before engaging on this series. But if you have, if you understand the fundamentals of ASP.NET Core, you can go ahead and just follow along in this series. What we'll be doing is we're going to create a new project, and this time we will call it ASP.NET empty. Let me select this template. You can look, okay, that's it, ASP.NET Core empty. I want to start from ground up so you can understand, in case you have no idea about what ASP.NET Core is. Here we will be calling it TCS. Let's call it TCS REST service. Let's call it REST service, TCS REST service. That is the name we will be giving it. And we will go ahead and build a project, and it will configure HTTPS, absolutely correct. Let's keep it .simple for now, and we will have the project. All right, so behold, we have a REST service for our application. Now, the REST service will allow us to build different clients that can talk to TCS accounting application, and whether it's a mobile client or a desktop client or a web client that can interface, would allow our TCS accounting application to interact with outside other applications that need to take advantage or utilize the services we've built using TCS accounts or built in TCS accounting. So let's go through this. For now, this will be our startup project. So we'll set this as startup project. And we will have a basic hello world statement that shows our platform. So we can go ahead and just run this. And actually, this is the first time our application is going to be exposed to the outside world for utilization. And one of the mediums to access this application will be through this RESTful endpoint. So when we say server, app, or endpoint, we are meaning what we mean in the full stack fundamentals is actually a RESTful service. That is basically what it is. So this is our application, and that is good. Hello world. And this is our RESTful service. And let's start building different things that require interaction with our application. The very first thing I would like to do is to properly structure this RESTful service. And if you understand that in the REST endpoint or RESTful service, we have endpoints, and endpoints are locations that allow people or users or other applications interact with TCS accounting. So we should provide endpoints that users or other applications can use and interact with TCS accounting. And for that, we'll start from the business context. But before we do that, let us do the basic thing. Let's structure this project properly. That means I will create a folder. In this folder, I will call it, let me call it request management endpoint, or request manager, or endpoint manager. I'm actually thinking, because in a typical application, you have a request coming in on the pipeline. What handles the request? And that is what I'm saying. So we should call it request manager or endpoint managers. Let's call it endpoint. Let's use the professional terminology, endpoint managers. All right. That is one thing we will have. So the next thing we will have is I will have a configurations folder where we can provide some pipeline services. Do we really need that? I'm not sure we need that because of the way so I'm not really sure we will need that, but let me put the config folder, configurations folder in there, configurations, in case we need one. So this is the entry point to our application, and there is no problem with that. I believe you know what builder means. If you do not, I would advise you listen to the ASP.NET fundamentals before you come to this learning series, because I won't be talking much about it. I'll go straight to the point. So this is the first endpoint we have here, and obviously that is not what I want. What I want is, I would like to do this first. I would like to configure OpenAPI for this application. And to do that, I will need to install some services. And we also need, because this is actually a client, a true client, we'll also need to install support for Entity Framework connecting to SQL Server. So first and foremost, I will add a reference to my services. So under dependencies, I'll add a reference, a product reference, and here I will just reference business logic. And that is one of the things I would add as a reference. The next thing I would like to add as a reference, similar to my test, is I'll add a support for TCS infrastructure. I think so, that is the proper thing. That shouldn't be TCS infrastructure, that should be TCS accounting infrastructure. That is the proper thing. And that infrastructure is basically a data layer. And for now we are good. We have support for those two, and let's come in here before we build our application. So the very first thing I'll do is builder, let me configure this, dot services dot I think I have add application, add TCS accounting application. Am I correct? TCS, let's go check what is the name of the very first service here. And if you check dependency injection here, is use TCS accounting application. I don't like the way I use the word use here. I think I would use this medium to because I'm adding to that service, so I would refactor this to be add TCS accounting application. TCS accounting application. So let's rename this to add. So all the references should change to add. And here is add the singleton for the services. This is not necessary. But in case you want to use a singleton for the services, but this is not advisable. So let me just put that in there, add singleton. But this is the one I want. I want the scope configurations for that. So services.add TCS. Let's go just copy this name, TCS accounting application. All right, that is what I want. That will add all the accounting configurations in the services we have in the web API. So we need to add a reference to this, and we can go ahead and do that in here. The next thing I think we should do is that before we actually do this, we need entity framework, and we need to add a managed NuGet packages. We need to add entity framework so that our application, as we did for the test, can connect to a database. The database will set up and interact with the application. So we need to install entities framework SQL Server. This is very much required component, and that is what we will need to add as a project dependency. And that is good. So we've added that already. So here we will need to, as we did for the test project, which you can check when we do integration testing, under the resource configuration, you notice the same thing we did here, obviously almost the same thing we would have to do for the web application as well. So here, before we do this, because we need an instance of the DB context added into application, so we would say builder.services.add DB context. Add DB context. Add DB context, which is true. And here we'll pass in the TCS DB context, which is required. And we will pass in the required configurations for that. Functions. and that is what we will do as usual. So now we need a way of actually connecting to a connection string, and one of the ways we can do that in a very professional environment is to use external resources to put it in a configuration file instead of putting it in here. And I would suggest I would show you how to set that up, how you can set that up, a configuration file, and we put that inside here, and we connect the application to use whatever configuration we supply it with. For now, we would just go inside here and options.use SQL, use SQL server, that is it, and we will pass in the DB connection string that we specify. And to do that, we can just pass in DB connection, and that is straightforward. And by the way, we do not have DB connection string, so we need to introduce a local for us to have it. Not here, sorry. X. Let's just do var DB connection equals to, and as usual, we can come into our text environment, resource configuration, and copy it. Just copy this out and put it in here. And that is the configuration we would be using, and this should be this, and that is what we should be using. All right, and that is all. I'm not sure this is needed, and that is straightforward. That is the connection string we should be using. Did I miss some? DB connection string, and that is what it is. So the next thing we've done that. The next thing I would like us to do that our TCS accounting application will require, that we need to configure builder.services add infrastructure components. So our TCS, actually I'm not sure I used the word add, actually use the word use, and I will change that to add, and we'll refactor this to be add, rename this to add. So this will add components for application. Just so we'll come here and say add TCS. Let's go ahead and copy that at the moment. TCS infrastructure component, and we come here and like TCS infrastructure component, and basically that is it. And what we have here is builder, and we can come in here and that is what we need. So we have the business logic, we have TCS infrastructure, we have TCS accounting application, and that is all we need to communicate with our server. I would like to test that we actually can save a resource. So for now, I would grab this, I would change this to, by the way, let's create another endpoint. Here I will try and see if we can connect and get the accounts information, because we are actually using the, sorry about this, this is going to escape this one. We're actually going to use this database where we used the one we used for testing to be sure that we are properly configured to run. And here I'm going to pass in a lambda expression, which is already there. I'm going to do this. I'm going to use a disposable. I'm using var scope equals app.services.createScope. That is vital. Then I'm going to use var services, also var service equals scope.service provider get required service. You should know this by now. And what we want is an account service, our account service. account service, and doing that we can get that. And once this endpoint is called, what we just need to do is we will go on service.get accounts. So to return all the accounts that we have in the system, that is the very first test I want to see. So I'll be sure that this configuration is actually very correct. So let's run this and see what happens. Alright, so we have hello world, and let's go to accounts. That's the endpoint. The endpoint here is where I'm going to. So we go to accounts, and let's check whether we can get all the accounts in the server out here. So that would go connect to the server and get the account information out here if it's possible. Obviously we are not getting that out. Function F12. Let me refresh so I can see what happens. 200 accounts. That executes. So the key thing in there is that we did not actually return anything. So that's why that list of accounts is not showing. So here we should actually return service.get accounts. And that is the proper thing to do. Let's run it again. And we should have a list of accounts when we hit that endpoint. And that is it. So we can come here and click on accounts. That is definitely what we want. And that should get a list of accounts for us. Yes, so we have the list of accounts in here. And that is good enough. Actually I need let me do something. Let me change this and use another. Okay, so we have basically I have Postman installed, so I can come in here and change that, use my Postman to grab the response to that request, and let's go in and get that so we can have it properly arranged. Okay, so this is the result of the request using Postman. And we have his control account, and we can see a properly defined JSON return object or JSON array returned to us, and that is good. So that is one way we can interact with our API. So we can go ahead and close this, and let's close this now. And that is working. So it means we can connect to a database and get information out and also put information in. And doing that, it means that this configuration is okay, but we will need to refactor this DB to put it in the application configuration file itself. I will leave that for the later. We will do that later. So we have seen how we can return an account. So let's go ahead and build the very first component I want to build in the REST services is actually, let's close this, a endpoint managers. So here I'm going to create an endpoint manager for business, probably, yeah, but preferably. So I'll add a class, and this class will be business service endpoint manager. So I'll say business service endpoint manager. So manager endpoint request handler endpoint manager, it's the case maybe. Business endpoint service, let me use the word business endpoint service. That is better. Business endpoint service, endpoint services, that should be the name. All right, so let's business endpoint service, and that is what I will add inside endpoint manager. So instead of doing endpoint manager, I will rename this to endpoint service. So let this be endpoint service. and endpoint services, and here we'll change these to endpoint services like that. And this is basically going to be a static class, and the very first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to specify static read only resources, static read only fields, which is first one will be get service or get business, and here I would give it the endpoint that is get business, and here probably it may require you to have a business ID. So that's my path specification, get business, and that is what I want to call it. The next one is public static read only string. Sorry, I missed that. Get business. The next one will be get business. Let's do this. Let this be get businesses, and this should be get businesses, and then this should be get business. The next endpoint I would like to have is a static read only string that should allow me to create business information or get default business. So I could say get default business, and here is get default business, and that is basically what the endpoint should do. The next endpoint I would also like to get is get or create business endpoint, and here should be, this is basically a create request, so it should be create business or create business. Oh, let me just write business create, right? Business finish is a create endpoint. And another one I would like to do is update business endpoint and still business, and but this time I may really need to pass in the business ID of the business I want to update. Then the last one is delete business endpoint, and here I just need to tell the business I want to delete. That's good. So probably this looks the same like update, so I would go ahead and just pass in this to be update business as well, right? And that is better. So the next thing I would like to build is I'm going to build static resources. So I'll say static endpoint builder. To show you something, let me do this. Let's come to our program and put your cursor here. You'll notice that this is actually a route handler response. This route handler here is a response, and this route handler, let's do this, and it actually extends I endpoint convention builder. That is basically what it is, and this is a concrete implementation of it. So to take advantage of that, I would like to make our endpoints define our I endpoint convention builder like that. And here I would pass in this should be get business. Let me use the word map business. And here I'm going to use, this is basically going to be an extension method. So this will extend our endpoint route builder. That is what I want it to be. And here we'll call it builder. And that is, I know this is a bit advanced, but you will understand what I'm trying to do. And that is what the extension method is actually going to do. Map get business. Let's do that. And here I would basically return builder.mapGate. So mapGate method is what I want. And here I'll pass in the very first thing I will actually pass in is get business field, and here I'll pass in a constructor or a lambda expression, that I can write my request under like that. And doing it this way, I can actually, you'll see the power of me crafting the code out like this. So I can do get business here. I would actually, because get business here actually requires a business ID. So I would, where's the business ID coming out from? Probably from route. From the route, I would show you that. And from the route, the request route, then we pass in the GUID, business ID. And that's what I'm going to return. Returning this, I'm going to show you this something. So I can come in back here in the programs and copy out this line of instructions. Come back here and put it in here. And this time you're talking to the builder. So builder here has access to services. And I will say builder.services. Let me see. Service provider. Beautiful. Dot create scope. And service dot scope dot get required service, because this is actually get required. I still need to pass that in there. And services dot required service, then return get accounts instead of get accounts. This is actually get. So this actually is business service, and we need to have access to business service inside in here. And we can also say service dot get business, and we can pass in the business ID. So this here will be mapped to this. All right, that is basically what we need to do. So we can go ahead and grab the service provider to do that. And I would like this to be an asynchronous operation, so let's go ahead and grab that way. And this is clean enough. We can now copy this. This map get business returns requires that map configuration, but the very first one I would like to create is map businesses. So in map businesses, we are not going to require anything because it's just an endpoint. So this is get businesses. And here we are just going to get return get businesses. I think so. All right. And that is beautiful. I want to show you the advantage of this. We've created for get business. Let's get default business. So to get default business, it's a straightforward thing. So we can come here, copy this line of instruction and put it in here. And here we can basically say get default map, get default map, get default business thing, default business. And here we do not need to specify anything, and this is going to be get default business. And we can go ahead and call get default business, and that will give us the default business. That is clean. Map get business, map business, map get businesses, map businesses. I think I'll settle for that. Let's leave that. Yeah. So we have map get business and map get default business. So I'll also duplicate that and create for map create business. Let's use that. That is the next one, create business. And here we are going to use create business. And here we are not going to do map get, it is map post. And actually I'm taking advantage of this features in the .NET, ASP.NET Core. And this should be a body from body, because this is an API. And here we are going to pass in a business data object. What do we call this? DTO, All right, let's map that detail. And here we are going to be save business. And we can say detail. Data transfer object. And that is what we need. We can also do the same thing for updating a particular business, and map update business. And the same point builder, here we get a detail and from the body, but we'll also need to do something from the GeoID, because if you check this endpoint, update business requires a route parameter business ID. So there should be a way we can grab that from the request pipeline. When there is a request coming into the pipeline, we should be able to get that from the route. So from the route, we should be able to get the business ID. And here we need to... Do we need that business ID? I do not think, because save business here does both. We could actually do this. Let's actually be sure that that business actually exists. That is a double check. Do we need to do that? All right, let's go ahead and do this. If business ID it's not equal to null, or GUID.empty, sorry, it's not equal to GUID.empty, just go ahead and do this. And that is update. We should go ahead and do for delete. The delete would also take the same signature like update. And here is map put. Remember, that is not map post. And here is map delete. And we will do the same thing. And here will be map delete. And we'll return that for map delete. And this we will call dot delete business. And we'll pass in the ID, there's no post from the body, just the route endpoint is what we need. And return business ID. That is basically, am I missing anything? Yeah. Not all code returns a result. I'm coming. I think I missed something. Let's bring this down. Yes, so I think there is a concern here, because here we are trying to return business, and if the business is not there, we're trying to return, for instance, null or something, and that is creating some form of conflict, because this method is supposed to have a single return type of a particular return type, but here we are complicating the procedure and trying to implement two return types. You're trying to have two return types, which is not ideal. So that would bring me to the next thing we should consider in designing our endpoints, and that will be to make sure we use a standard that returns a particular endpoint. So to do that, we will adopt the generic result method that comes with ASP.NET, and that is using the result object. So we can use the result object and make a more definite response than to actually return different objects or try to manipulate the type of object we return. So to do that, I'm thinking we should do this. So in this case, if we have a business, so whatsoever is the result here, for instance, whatsoever, this has a return type of GUID. So what I will do is I would say return result dot OK, and pass in the value here that returns, that says okay, that service does exist, and we should return that result. Else, if it is not so, we can return null, satisfactory. But this is not what I want. instead of to satisfy this condition we can return null, but that is not ideal. So we can actually return results dot not no content, because should we use no content, or we should use not a valid result dot let me check. There is something unprocessable entity. That is what I remember. So we can return an unprocessable entity because the GUID is actually empty. So now currently what is saying that is the handler here actually returns a more composite result object, which is a HTTP result, and doing this gives a more definite descriptive result, especially when we inject OpenAPI specification for these APIs. There's something that just hit me right now, and I think we should refactor this and see what we get. But before we do that, let's see something. Let me have a look. Let me run this method and have a look at something that is very fundamental. So we have actually resolved this now, and we can come back here to resolve for this particular function, updated business. So if this is here, we can go ahead and say result dot okay, and pass in the result here, and we can actually return something else in result. We can actually copy this unprocessable entity and put it in here, and that is simple enough for us to do. So let's go ahead and run the service and see what we get in return. So we have the proper endpoint, and we can go in here and actually check out our business. That was the very first thing. Let's go in here and hit business endpoint if there's any result, and obviously there is no result. Let's come here, it's get business. This is not proper, so I'll use get business for now, and I'll change it to business. So this will not return anything because I have not registered this I've not hooked this up in the pipeline, so this will not run successful. But for now, let's come back here and let me make some changes. This should be business, not get business, and this should be business, and this should be default business, and those are the proper and ideal naming conventions I want to use. And let's go ahead and do something else. Let's go ahead. We have all the endpoints configured for the business context, and we have them listed. Let's close this. Close this, and we have them here already. So how do we inject this into our application? To do that, we can come down here and actually do something like app.map business, map get business. Do we have something like that? Get business. All right, so we have this endpoint here, and we can do that. All right, and we can do that, and we can also do map default business because we do not know. Let's do businesses first. Businesses, and let's do another one for app.map default business, or default business. I think so. Default business, and map default business. So we have that there, and let's run our application and let's see what we can get. So we hit the endpoint, hello world, and let's go to the endpoint. Let's hit the account endpoint first, and we should get a list of accounts as usual. Okay, so we have the list of accounts. Let's go ahead. Permit me to use Postman in this case. I've not used .postman. Alright, let's use Postman here. and we'll copy this URL and come to Postman and put it on Postman. So we have Postman here, and we can, I think we already did that before, so let's put it here and click send, and we can see the result, and we have the result. Let's do for business or businesses and hit that endpoint. All right, so we have for businesses, we have updated Thompson, and this, if you remember vividly, were inserted or put in the database by a test. When we were running the test, that's how we had this data in the database. So we can retrieve our businesses through this endpoint, so it means our logic is actually working very well. The map business, and let's go ahead and hit the default business endpoint. And what was the name here? It's default business. So if we did specify something like that, we should be able to retrieve it. So we can say default business. All right, so we have default business, and we already get this, and this is the default business. So it means our instructions, our line of instructions are running perfectly. Another thing that I would like us to test out using this endpoint is perform a post request. So here we have business, and we can stun here and create a post request. And that is the next thing we should be doing. But there is something that concerns me right now. What are the parameters for us to use and build a post request? How would users that come to use TCS accounting or want to see the API and connect to it, how would they know the requirements for connecting to the endpoint and talking and exchanging information? How would somebody that is building another system or building a front end who desires to communicate with this endpoint be able to interact with TCS accounting server application? That brings me to the next point we need to discuss, and that is Open API specification. ASP.NET Core supports OpenAPI out of the box, and we just need to perform a few configurations to get that up and running. The very first thing we need to do to have OpenAPI specification configured for us is to add a support for, as usual, is to add a support for Endpoint Explorer, which already comes inbuilt with the application. So what we can do here, we can come here and say builder, as usual, .services, add endpoint API Explorer. And that is the very first service we need to inject into our build configuration. The next thing we're going to do is, because there is an implementation of OpenAPI that comes out of the box as well, implemented by Swagger. You would see a lot of utilizations in many platforms of Swagger. So Swagger is an OpenAPI specification, and we can go ahead and use it. Builder.services.add SwaggerGen, and probably SwaggerGen does not come out of the box, so we may need to actually install it. Let me check. So we do not have SwaggerGen in here in our API, so we need to add SwaggerGen to our application. So to do that, we can go to use the NuGet package manager, which is come to dependency, add manage NuGet packages. And once we get to NuGet packages, we need to come to here and look for swashbuckle ASP.NET Core, and that is all we need to do. And once you find that, we can go ahead and add so we need to add the SwaggerGen to our project. So we go ahead and add SwaggerGen to our project, and this is, we have added the SwaggerGen, and we can come to we can come to program.cs, and you notice that we've added SwaggerGen to our project. Now Another thing we need, adding Swagger Gen is not enough. Once this brings a specification into a project, but we need to use it. So after doing this, we can go ahead at this point in time, just write up dot use Swagger, and this is enough. But I also want an extra functionality, which is using the Swagger UI. So if I add the Swagger UI, it will also add some form of flair and presentation for us to browse, ready-made presentation for us to browse our API. And we can go ahead and do that, but we did not install the Swagger UI. So we need to install Swagger UI to have access to the Swagger UI functionality out of the box. So we can come back to NuGet and we need to add the Swagger UI. So go ahead and add Swagger UI. And adding Swagger UI, that is all to our application, resolves this for us. And we have Swagger and Swagger UI in our application. So let's run this again and have a look at it. So we'll still come up with the hello world and the accounts, but I want to show you something else. Just adding those few lines of instruction to your RESTful service will upgrade our UI to something different. So we can come to this endpoint, Swagger endpoint, and check out what we get out of the box. I think index.html, if I'm not mistaken. And that is what we get. So we get this beautiful UI wrapped into our project where we have the root endpoint, we have accounts, and we have businesses. You can see we have businesses and we have default businesses, which we have defined in our application. So this is what Swagger gives to us. And you notice when someone hits our root endpoint and it shows hello world, that is not ideal. I would like our root endpoint to, at each point in time we call our root endpoint, we should always get the Swagger result instead of the hello world. So to do that, we can make a little tweak or configuration. And by the way, let's be done with the hello world by now. We understand what that is. We can get rid of this, or I can comment it out because I want to show you something. And doing that is, rebuild and apply changes. And doing that, we can now configure put in some basic configurations that can give us a very robust output for our application. So there's no endpoint now, and let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, I'll need to add a few configuration or options for our application. And that is going to be very direct. So to make Swagger be the default endpoint when we launch when we hit our root endpoint, we can come up with some configuration options here, and these configuration options basically take in as you can see, it takes in a Swagger options, which is a delegate, and we can come up with the options that the wrap prefix should be to nothing. So we'll set this to string.empty, and basically that is what it should be. So let's change this to this string.empty, and let's confirm that actually displays our Swagger page as the default page for our application. So let that run, and let's see. Alright, so that hits the Swagger URL, but it cannot load the API definitions because it cannot find where the JSON is. So that is the URL for the JSON, and we'll just copy this and we'll come in here and I'll specify that options.swagger endpoint, where it will get the JSON result, is, if you notice that from the IntelliSense that this takes two arguments, And so the first argument will be here and the second argument will be there. So here we'll put in the version 1 endpoint, and that is going to be, let's just put this as app demo. This is just a basic description, app demo, and I'll show you. Let's restart this, and if we have hot reload, sorry about that, if we have hot reload, we should be able to see the changes there and then. And I'm not sure this does work. Unfortunately it does not, so let's restart the application. Let's restart the application and see what are the development that we can get. I've seen a mistake again. That was still come up properly because there is a little error, and that is, I forgot to put that the Swagger endpoint should have an endpoint like this, and this should be inside Swagger itself, because Swagger, and this should come in like that. Yeah, that is the proper way. And let's come in here and let's stop this and start again. Let's start this again. Alright, so we can have access to our service properly now, and that is very, very good. And you notice that the definition is app demo, but that is not ideal. To change that app demo, we can come in here and actually give a more robust name. So we come to builder dot environment. Let's access the environment dot application name. We can specify the application name in here as TCS accounting service. All right, and basically that is what we need. And here we can come back here, and instead of specifying this, we can use the string interpolation remarks, and we can come in here and specify something like this. Sorry, this, and here we can specify whatever argument we pass in. So here will be builder dot environment dot application name. All right, and we have already specified that, and here we can actually see that should be, let's keep it there. All right, the next thing we will do is, let's go and check that out first before we proceed. Let's have a look at it again one more time and see that that configuration has actually taken place. And all right, so we have TCS accounting service. That is a better notion, and you notice that this is the TCS accounting service, and we have these two methods here. Let's add more value to this. Let's come back to our application and do more things. Let's come here, and instead of, we actually did map business, let's come to the business endpoint and add a property to this. So here we'll add the week tag, and we can properly target. And if we target, we can target with a better description, and we can say that they should be tagged with a generic tag that all objects that are associated with it can understand or can be grouped together. So I will show you how to do that. So here we will put the with tag to be a more generic name with tags, and we can put that here. And did I create a name here? Let's come up with a tag name here. So probably we can come in here and say static. Let's put it on top. Static read only string name, and we can pass in the name as business. And let's see what that does to our code. Here we'll give it name, and that is one thing. Let's have a look at it and see what that is. and let's restart application, and let's see, restart. Obviously, let's run this again and see what happens with that endpoint. The very first endpoint name is, let's see what the with tags does, and you would appreciate it. So now we will have business, right? It gives a grouping to it, and if we do that for default business, instead of having this ugly TCS REST service, we can do the with tags here again, and copy this line of instruction and put in almost all the returns like that. Let's put all of them here with tags, with tag. Sorry, just noticed something. So we can put it here, and we can put it here, and let's see what happens when we do that and restart that. So you will notice that the business noun has a proper definition for a good tag for it. And let's open this more so you can see better. And you notice that we have parameters, we have responses, and we can stand here and actually try out our application. So we can execute this and see what's the result is like, and have a feel or an idea of whether we actually returning proper things. So here we have the result, and that is of that particular request. And you notice the request is a get request, and it gives you that and tells you, and here's the definition of the request. It's a get request, and it returns a JSON. But we can add more information to provide more intelligence about what the users of this API should expect. And though we can see that let's close this and come here. Let me come back here. Though we can see that, let me refresh this. Let me show you something. Though we can see that it tells you that this is the response time, this is what you need, and this is the media. This is the response is a JSON, and that is what you get. But there is no description to this endpoint. And that brings me to the next thing we need to talk about, which is adding more value to this endpoint to actually give it a more descriptive notion or information, more descriptive details. And in doing that, we can utilize some of the basic, very handy descriptions that are included in the .NET. So to do that, we can have this as, for instance, let's do this. We can come back to application, and inside the business here. So let's add some configurations that will give some form of descriptions to our endpoint. And then we need to use a function called with metadata. And here we need to instantiate a new Swagger attribute. This is not here, it's inside what we call the annotations, and we need to add that. So let's come to our, I think we have it somewhere here, not here, sorry, we have it here. Let's save this and close it. We have it here, so we need to add these annotations to our application. So let's do that. We've added that noun, and we can come up to the endpoint service. So this is new Swagger attribute, Swagger operation attribute. Yes, that is it. And here we can pass in the values for summary, and summary is going to be some form of summary and description, and we'll pass the value for description. Let's bring this to a new line, and let's bring this to a new line, And let's bring this details to a new line so that it can be easy to understand. Alright, so we have that, and we have description to be description, and it will be some form of data. And that is the new attribute we'll add. So summary, this is returns let me say list of businesses. And description, this returns a list of businesses. I think that is what I should use. Returns a list of businesses. So this, let me use the word returns a list of businesses. This is trial, we'll change it. And one more thing. So we return a list of businesses. Let's go ahead and see what that does to that endpoint. And let's have a look at it. So when you come down here, it tells us businesses. Oh, we're missing something very, very vital. Sorry, that is not captured here because we've not enabled data annotations inside our application. So let's go ahead and do that right away. So to actually so this is not showing because we do not have the annotations configured at this point. So all we need to do is to pass in options, and here we can come in here and say options dot enable annotations, and that is all we need to do. So doing that, we can come back here and run this. This should run successfully and show us, sorry about this. So this should run successfully and shows the brief details we've written about our endpoints in a beautiful manner. So you now see we have the definition of this endpoint. List of businesses. When you get this endpoint, returns a list of businesses. And you can get, you see the row, there is some form of description. And that is what, so that is better because those who are using our endpoint service can actually know what to expect for this. So here we should say list of businesses looks ideal, and let's get a better definition for what we want to return. Having seen that, we can go ahead and actually give more definite description to our endpoint. So this provides a list of businesses, within TCS accounting. Then let's just end there. Provides a list of businesses, and here is let's just use the summary and forget about the description for now. Alright, so let's use the summary and just say provides a list of businesses. At least you can provides a list of businesses. Yeah, at least here that is better. So at least you can see you can have description factored into your endpoint definitions, and that is fairly okay. But there's something else I want to say. Assuming that we do not have a list of businesses, assuming some users are not authorized, it actually returns a null. And if you notice, let me show you something else in our application, in our endpoint description. We could make if you notice that this get businesses endpoint, let me show you, as it is a basic description. I think we should give a description to it. It actually makes sense to actually provide some form of description to this, right? And if you notice that it tells us that this produces only one response, and that is ideal. But what if in another condition that we may have more than one response? What do we actually inform the user? All right, so that brings me to the next point. We can come down here. Here we have two different responses. And what do we inform the user about these responses? What do we tell them? And as usual, let's copy this out. Let's copy this description. Let's copy this and put it in here. And here is update business information. Update business information. That's what the endpoint does. So we can put a little description. To update business information, make a put request with the specified JSON. To this endpoint. Let's do something like that. And we have two types of results here. Let's go ahead, and here we can come back to our program and say, let's have a look at it. Map update. This is wrong. This is not create business. This is update business. Just notice that, and this is delete business. Delete business. That is the ideal now. Alright, so we have those endpoints there, and we're good. So let's go ahead and come to our program. Here we used to say map business. So here we'll say app.map update business, and that is it. And app.map delete business. We can as well include the rest of the parameters that app.map create business, and that is a complete package now. And let's run the service and have a look at it. Voila, so we have this endpoint now ready, and we have business tag. We have provided a list of business of the business information. When we come down here, we can say to update business information, make a put request with the specified JSON to the endpoint. All right, so specified JSON to the endpoint. That is not complete, but just to give you an idea of how you can do this, that's why I did that. You can see the summary and the description comes in very handy, and we can use that. And there's something else I thought about. Let me look at this. There's no description here, but there's something else. This should tell us how many responses we get, because it's not only a 200 response we can get here, we can also get another response, which is I think we call it's an unprocessable entity response, and that is a 422 response, and we can also get that. So how do we do that to make sure we provide that information in our endpoint? So let's go ahead and check what we can do. So having a look at that, let's make a slight modification to this application and give some more adequate responses. So for instance, this particular map update business produces 2 responses. So we can actually tell users of the API the responses they should get from this. So we'll come here and click produces, and this one produces the very first response. Here is actually a boolean, if I'm not mistaken, a GUID. So here we can tell you're going to get a GUID, and this response will be, it will contain a status code of 200. So we say status codes, the status code dot 200, status 200, that is some here. Okay, and we can end here. We can go ahead, not just returning a status code of 200 for that instruction. We can go ahead and return for more instructions as necessary. So for instance, if we did that for 200, for the second result, we can also inform them that we're going to return, instead of a GUID in this case, we're going to return an unprocessable entity. We can pass a message in here and say that this should be business information does not exist in the system. We can come up with this message so that this system, we can come up with this message that, okay, this business information does not exist. Let's put a business, right? And we can, this business information does not exist in the system. That basically is a string, all right? And we can come in here and put string. And this, we would say this is a 422. I think that is the name of unprocessable entity, 422. So status code here will be dot status code 422 status. Sorry about that. The status for 422. I need the whole line. Status for unprocessable entity, and we need to return that, and that is what we need to do. So we can come up with this detailed definition about endpoints, and this makes the users of the endpoint service understand what to do. So let's run this again and see what we get this time when we call update, and what are the possible responses we can get on our API. So doing that, we can come in here using Swagger, and we can check the update information in the users, and this is descriptive enough. And we know we have two responses. So one is a GUID, which is a JSON. When it is successful, you get a JSON response, and the other one, when it is not successful, you get a string of a message. You get a message. And that is what you should expect. You get a message that something is not right, why it failed, and that is going to come in as a JSON. So let's do something. Let's try this out. Let's get a business here. Let's try this out. Let's do this. Let's put in a message here that says this for. Let's just copy this. Copy. Paste, and try this and execute. A valid accounting method is required. That is a very good call, because we did not put anything, but they should not even reach this point, because does that business exist in the system? It definitely means it exists. And let me see, let's stop this, because that information doesn't exist. Let's check our endpoint. If GUID, that is what I said. I said something that the service is not right. Alright, this is not supposed to reach that point. and that, thank God that happened in practical, because I said I should rewrite the service properly. And to do that, let's do this, because I don't think that actually exists. Let's copy this and put in here. So doing that, I said we have to refactor that application again. But for demonstrating purposes, let's keep on here. So what we'll do is we'll go inside here and see if we have a service. So var var business equals to service dot get business port ID, get business, and here we will pass in business ID. And we're very sure that this instruction actually returns a business or null. So if business is not null, go ahead and process it like that. So that will go and process it. If it is null, it will return this unprocessed entity. And let's go ahead and run that again and see the result of what we will get. So, and here is our instruction. Let's look at this properly and reload this, and we can come to update business information. And let's just copy this again, because this does not exist. We're very sure about this. Try and paste it and execute. And execute. I think we missed something. We didn't copy that properly. So let's copy this properly and execute. Alright, so that is executing. This shouldn't hit the server again. They should come back with a response, and it should say that business information does not exist in the system. And it tells you that this is an error and this does not exist in the system. That is the response we get from that request, and that is what our users should be able to test this and see what they should get, like responses, alright? And that is very good of our system. That's what we are trying to build. So we'll do the same thing. If you notice this, we can actually cancel this. We're done with that. We can come here, and you notice that this is just plain, doesn't tell anything. If a business doesn't exist, for instance, if we try this out and we hit this endpoint, paste, and execute this, we just get a response, a 422 response with no details, nothing, just a 422 response. The user doesn't know what that means. So the response message here provides the user some form of knowledge. So doing that, we need to come in here and just copy the same thing here and put it inside here like this. And we can do, and let's bring this to here to be properly formatted. Let's put this here so that it can be properly formatted like that. That is better. That is better. And we are good to go. So we need to copy this message, this business information does not exist, as well, and put it in here, and we can run this again. So restart this, and so let's go to delete that information from the system and see what the result is. So doing that, we're here and we can come to business and we can check this out again. So we can copy this here, and we know definitely that this is going to fail, and put it and try this out, put it in here, and we can execute, and we will get a response. So when we call a delete, this is actually a delete. We get a JSON response. This business information does not exist in the system. So if you want to try this out practically, you can copy this URL here and put it in let's put it in Postman so we can have a better idea. Put it in Postman, paste, and change this to a delete request and send it, and we get bad request find but sorry, there's a mistake here. Let's send this like this proper. This business information does not exist in the system, and that is what you get in return. All right, that is the message. That is what we get. We can choose to format this message properly by giving it a message, assigning it to a value, all right, a key and a value, and we can decide to use it the way it is. So on the browser, that is what happens, and that is what our endpoint is doing. All right, so let's close this at the moment and let's stop this. We now know what we should expect from our application, and we are formatting this properly. So the next thing, this is not this summary is not included here, so we can add this metadata information as well. And we can come in here and put it in here, and you see delete business information. All right, so we can see to delete business information, make a delete request with the specified to this endpoint, to this endpoint. Right, and you can see how to make a delete request is there. So we have a properly suited JSON, and you can notice that for where we have two results, we're actually returning two results, and we're producing two different responses. So let's copy this knowledge we have here and actually spread them throughout our endpoint service. So the very first one I want to start with is this already has one. I'll put this here, but there's something also missing here. Here we're just returning a 200 if it's successful. Well, how about if the server fails, or what happens? All right. So this can be nested in a try catch block to respond with an appropriate message for a user to understand. But this case, we can come in here and return results.ok and pass in the values, and that's still okay. That is what the user will get. And here we can pass in, that is basically okay. If we have an error, we cannot connect to a database or some form of error, there should be some way of actually getting that error, nice return error with a beautiful result, a better way. So we can do that instead of actually returning a very rugged code. For now, let's leave that. This is already getting complex enough, and that is what we will do. Let's wrap all our responses in a result object, results.ok, and dot we would return this, and we can come in here with tags, and this is proper. Okay, that is already there, don't need to duplicate that, and we can have here this is get business, and if this get business bot ID, if this is null, what do you get? How do we get that this user does not exist? There should be some responses. All right, you can figure that out yourself, and we can go ahead and add more values to this. This doesn't produce this, and so we should remove it. Doesn't produce that response. And where I will need it more specifically, we can come here and do the same thing. Return results dot okay, and pass in the value, and that is good. We can make a post. This is where we can definitely get a whole bunch of results out. And I want to show you something that is vital. So when you're creating a business, there can be error. When you're creating you're making a create or a post request, a user should get a definite error about what has happened in the system. And for instance, we have a whole bunch of validation messages to return and tell the user something's not correct, something's correct. And how do we do that? All right. So for instance, when we indeed that post, how do we actually do that? Get that result out in a very nice way. So to do that, that means we must nest this request in a try-catch block. And doing that, we can come in here. So that gives our application the ability to respond gracefully to situations. Results dot. Okay. If that's okay, just get back and give him the ID. If it's not okay, so what actually happens? And whatsoever you get as a response, do not throw it. So we can get E here. We can say, because there's so many responses that can actually come. So we can say if this is an operation error, like a validation error, how do we tell? You see, that is why when we did the domain exceptions, we can actually tell what type of errors our application should return. So for instance, if save business here, let's go to save business and have a look at it. If save business actually did return, and we're doing this, let's come to business, let's come to here. It's a TCS domain exception. All right, so let me show you something. And let's come to service here. And if this, we can have as many try-catch block as possible. So let's add another catch block here. And here we can pass in a TCS domain exception and call it EX. And I just want to show you what you can do. So EX here, and here, instead of throwing it to the compiler, we can gracefully handle that exception. And instead of returning one type of message, or we can actually say return result, return results dot request. That is easier. ex.message, which tells the validation problem, and we can, if there is another type of exception which is not here, then it could be, let's assume that this will be results dot not bad request is a 500 is a server error, request result dot server error. Let me check that bad request. Let's just return problem and that should be e.message, something like that, and that is good for us. Okay, so we can actually get this going like that, and here we need to actually specify the type of results our application are producing. So here we can come in with tags and add this tags here, add this extensions here. And here we can specify that this produces a status code of 200, if that is correct. And this produces the next result is not, is a string actually, but it is unprocessable entity, which is an error. It's a validation error. So let's check if we'll see a status code of that tells us that this is a validation error. And let's see whether we have anything that has to do with validation. All right, obviously there is nothing like that, so this would likely be a 422. Let's use the status 422 as usual. That is good enough. That tells the user that unprocessable entity. I think I like that a lot, and that is good. And the next type of response we can get is an error. So produces produces an error in case we have, but this is not actually very good practice. So string, I don't like this. Let's return to the other string, and here we can have a status code of except type of result dot. It should be a 500 because there's a problem, so we should have a 5 internal server error, something like that. And those are the responses that this can produce. Alright. But this result shouldn't be baud request, it should be unprocessable entity. That should be the result. That is the most appropriate thing, unprocessable entity, and we should get that response. So let's start we have that for create, and we have update business, which has its own as well. And instead of returning the error or halting the application, let's get to see what response we can get. So instead of the application to halt, let's check. We've got some errors, some cases, and here we are getting results.ok and unprocessable entity. What happened? This, because since this is in a catch block, we can actually we need to return some form of results dot I think that we should have unprocessable. Ultimately, there should be a baud request, so we cannot process this. So like we could actually say baud request. Let's put that to be baud request. Like request cannot be processed at this time. Request cannot be processed at this time. Some form of notification like that. So, and that should be, yes, that resolves that return type there, because we have a try catch block here. And why is that so? So basically, that is the problem. We need to put a return here. And that resolves that problem. And let's run that and see what is the result when we're trying to create a business. And without supplying every required parameters to test out this functionality with our put business. And here we have a sample data we're going to send, and we're going to try this out. We're going to send this data out, and basically nothing is inside here, and we've not specified so many things. It should fail, so we'll execute this sample data. Let's see what response we get. And you notice we have these 3 types of responses: a server error and this. So here we get some form of response here, and it says post blah 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 business, a valid accounting method is required. So that is what I mean. That is the kind of messages we should get. Instead of causing an error, we actually get a valid accounting method is required. So those are the small things we need, and that tells me we cannot process this entity because that accounting method is not proper. All right, so that doesn't break our application. We can go ahead and say, okay, we've supplied you with an accounting method that is ideal now, and let's put an empty business name, for instance, and not no address, and the accounting method should be the proper one. Let's put 1, and let's re-execute this instruction and see what happens. We get business name is required. You see, our API is actually working very, very well at the moment, and that is what those who seek to connect to our API want to get. They want to get valid responses for why some operations are not. So it's a 400 or 422, and that's what actually happens. So if there's a server error, then it will go ahead and actually return the message here. Okay, go ahead and actually return what's the server error here. So for instance, let's do this. And there's no try catch for the update business, which we would have known that there is actually no, okay, that is another type of error. Don't worry about that. And we have these details for our business, and it is good. We can see that we can use this API to connect to our business and create business information and get business information out of the system. And every other component of the API still works very well. And we can see we have this details updated Thomson Limited, and that is good to do. You see, that is the power of a speedrun core, which we have shown. And let's go ahead and build the rest of our services, context out, and have a full-fledged service for consumption.